The Rubik's clock is a WCA event in which its solve state has all of the hands on the face of the clock pointing towards 12, like so. In this video, I will showcase what you need to do to become very good at this event. So I will show you how to solve the clock with the most basic method. So this is by no means an in-depth beginner tutorial, but this should be enough to get you started. So what you want to do is solve all of the edges on this side first, flip the clock, solve all the edges again, and then solve the corners. So the way you solve the edges is by lining up this center clock with any one of these clocks. And when you have one pin up, this will influence these 4. If you have 2 pins up, it'll influence these 6 right here. If you have 3, it'll do all but this one, and then if you do all 4 of them up, it'll influence all of these. When you have none of them up, you shouldn't have to worry about that, but that does moves on the back side. But to start, you want to have one pin up and align the center clock with one of these other clocks. So if I have this pin up here, I would align it to either this clock or this clock. But this clock is worse to do it to because you'll have to use more than one D move to solve the rest. I will show that later in the video. So I'm going to align this center clock to this right clock here, like so. As you can see, these two match together. It's kind of the same process for the second one, except you must use a pin that will affect both of these pieces at once. So then you match these two to this bottom one. Now you put a pin up that will affect the 3 solved pieces, like so. And then we got lucky here and we skipped this last step, but I'll make it look like we didn't. So here we have this last sort of line where you have 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces solved relative to each other. So you want to do is put these 2 pins up and then align with the last one. And now, since you have the whole cross solved, you can put all of the pins up and match them towards 12. It's the same process for the other side. I'll just do this flip to make it easier, but match the center clock with this clock. Same thing here, you have these 2, match it with this one. Match this block of solved dials to here. This entire right side here. So now we're on to corners. So for the corners, you will notice if you have 3 pins up, it'll move every single piece except for the one around this pin here. So to solve the corners, you want to have 3 pins up, and you want to move the cross to match this corner, like so. And now that corner is solved with the rest of the cross. You want to repeat this for the other one, so you have this one here. You want to move it to solve that. This one here. Finally, this one here. And now you can just align this face to 12, and the clock is solved. So with the basic techniques I just showed you, you can probably get around sub 8 to 8.4. But to get past that speed, you need to learn a few more techniques that will help you get faster. So in that example solve, I used my pin order, which goes UL, UR, DR, R, and then all. So as long as your pin order doesn't use more than one D move, it'll be perfectly fine. It doesn't really matter what your pin order is as long as you only use one D move. It's not necessary to have, but it's useful, so you can kind of have like a formula when you're always solving it. There are also a few more advanced techniques, like being able to align the crosses when you solve them to the 12 if it's on the side, this side, or the bottom if they're facing 3, 6, or 9. So that's useful because the fastest flip to do on clock is an X2, which will have the 12 pointing to the bottom. Moving to our first lucky case, we will start with the matching center clock to one of these edge clocks. So when we have this case, we want to either put it to the top or the side, depending on your pin order, as long as it preserves this block. So I'll show you how to do it from the top first. So if you have this pointing towards the top, you will not need to use any D moves. So you would solve it as normally. You would match the center to this right one, and match this block to here. But we don't have to do the DR move because this block is already solved, meaning we skip the step and we can just finish. Next, we have cases where these two diagonal clocks are matched. They're pointing towards the same number. So what you want to do here is you don't want to do your first move on a pin that only affects one of these. You can have 0, because here it won't affect any of them, or you can have both of them, as you can as it affects both of them and it won't break the lucky case, and you can kind of align these two together. But I usually start with them not affecting 0. So the way to do this is like, you just want to do what you would normally, match a center clock to this clock using that, and you skip the UR step and you just go straight to the DR move, and then like so. So the next case I will demonstrate is one that doesn't come up very often, but it's this line case where you have the middle 3, or if you're holding it like this, the middle 3 here, are all solved relative to each other. So for this case, you want to have 2 pins up that will affect these 3 middle clocks. So you can have the R pins up here or the L pins up here, but not U, because that breaks the line, or D, as that also breaks the line. So here I'm going to use the R pins up first, and I will align this line to this left piece, like so. And then to solve it, you would align this bar to this piece and solve the rest. Okay, so the next case we'll be talking about is when you have a solved block, like so. So for here, you can hold it in any orientation you want, but your first move must have these 3 pieces being affected. So something like this. Your first move should either align this block with this piece or this piece. It doesn't really matter which, but for the sake of this example, I'll stick what we've been doing. So we match this with this bottom one, both pins up, to this one, all match to 12. And for our last lucky case, we have this sort of case where you have matching adjacent pair here and a solved pair here. So this one's pretty straightforward. You just match the block with the solved adjacent. You have this block here, align it with the last piece, and solve. So another useful part of clock solving is memorizing the first 3 moves you'll do on the backside. So in this case, I got a lucky case, so I will memorize the first 3 moves typically, but you shouldn't do this unless you're already good with the fundamentals that were shown previously. So my first move will be UL4 minus, so I memo -4. My next move will be this piece to this piece, which will be 6. And then my last move will be 1, as this piece to where this piece moved to would be here and here. So my memorization is -461. Go to the other side, solve it, -461, and then I solve the rest of the clock. So the next lucky cases I will be showcasing are corner skips. Now, corner skips happen when a corner is solved alongside an edge, like so, and like so. So to do a corner skip, this pin must never be touched. So on your all move, you want to leave this pin down because the corner skip is here, and you never want to do this move when you're solving it. So if you do a pin order that doesn't use the DL dial, then you will use X2 corner skips when this case kind of looks like this on the left side. So you do your solve on the front as normal. But when you get to your last move, you do not put this pin up, you just put these 3. Does the same thing, but it preserves the corner skip. So when you go into your moves for the next side, it will preserve the corner and save a move. This also works if you have a different pin order. Like, for example, if you have, well, this doesn't work as well, but if you don't use DR for your pin order and you use DL instead, what you want to do is hold the corner skip on the right like this, and then solve like normally, and leave this pin up, and then flip, and then solve like normal, and you get a corner skip. Now, if you use a pin order and you can't preserve a corner skip with an X2, you can use a Y2 flip. So for this case, let's see. Okay, so if I use my pin order, which doesn't use this pin, I would look for a corner skip here, and these two are aligned, so this would be a corner skip here. So I would solve like so, leave this down, and then I just have to kind of flip this pin, and then you preserve a corner. And for our last corner skip, if you don't use the DR in your pin order, you put the bar here, and then put it on the back, leave this pin down, flip, solve like normal, and you have a corner skip. So there are a few more edge skips that can occur during your clock solves. So one of them is something like this, where after your first and second moves, there will be a block on the bottom made. So if you're not predicting a corner skip on the second side, you can put both D pins up and just align, and then you solve the cross and you save a move. So a second type of edge skip you can get is when after your first move, this will make these two line up to each other, and you solve it like so. So the last major type of edge skip is when after your first move, the opposite piece to what you just solved is solved to 12. So if you just solve like normal, you will see that you don't have to do the AUF. It'll just align the cross and solve it to 12 at the same time. So here we'll move on to advanced corner skips, which involve saving moves during corners, but not really predicted when doing this first side. So the first type of corner skip is when after doing your first three moves to solve these corners, this one will solve to 12, and you can just do one move, and that will sort of happen semi-often, but you can't really predict this one per se, like from the start, but it can be useful if you're looking ahead. So for corners, I personally solve them diagonally because you can get some pretty good skips on them. So solving them diagonally goes like, if I have something like this, I will put these two pins up because they will turn all but these two, and then I will solve one, put the pin around it up, and solve the other. And now, as you can see here, we'll have a skip because when we move these four, we will save a move because these two will both solve. Another type of skip you can get when doing diagonal corners is if you're on your final two ones and one of them is facing 12, you solve the other one first to skip a move on the 8. The other prominent method in the clock solving community is no flip, but I do not use it and I don't believe I'm qualified to talk about it. So Caleb Chelford has a tutorial on how to do no flip if you are interested in that, but I personally will still stick with flip.